Well, thank you for being with us. My name is Roman David. I'm the chief editor of Football Legal. We are here today to continue the second round of the AIAF webinars with a jump today into tomorrow's football. We have 3 roundtables: tomorrow's FIFA's regulations, tomorrow's contracts, and the question of investing in tomorrow's football. I would like to thank all the speakers of the day, of course, AIAF members, but also the guest speakers, Alexandra Gomez, Ornella Desiree Belia, who is going to join soon, James Kitching, and Roberto Branco Martins. Thank you very much for being with us. Before we start, I should mention that participants can ask questions or even vote for the questions that they found most interesting. And we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of each panel. I now give the floor to Patricia MOYERSOEN, President of the AIAF, for a few opening words. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Hello everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you on the second round AIAF webinar. The first one, we had it in April, now this webinar is, we have 2 English sessions. The first one was yesterday. Today, the second one, talking about tomorrow's football. And a third one tomorrow in Spanish. And that's very important for us to be open to different languages. So today it's English, and tomorrow, if you want to follow us on the same topics, one very important Spanish session. I would like also to thank our guest speaker, the core stakeholders of the worldwide football. Yesterday, Emilio Garcia kicked off the webinar. I would like to thank him. And we had a lot of speakers from FIFA, from yesterday, the World League Forum. Today we have EFAA, we have the guest speaker. Yesterday we had also CONMEBOL, and we have, of course, FIFPRO. Thank you very much, Alexandra, to be with us. We had Roy yesterday. And the purpose of AIAF and this webinar, AIAF is a place, a forum for debating. So we are all very happy as lawyers to have the opportunity to debate. Usually we try to debate physically during our Congress, but since we had to postpone the Congress, I think it's very nice to have these appointments and this webinar, and to be able to chat with you, to chat with us, to share our views, our questions, as lawyers, but also with the clubs, with agents. We all are involved in very difficult times because of COVID-19. And yesterday we talked about how COVID-19 could or would change football. So today the focus is on tomorrow's football, and I hand over directly to Sébastien LEDURE, who is going to moderate the first roundtable. Have a nice webinar. Sébastien, you have the floor.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Ronan, for this excellent initiative once more. AIAF is a young, modern, and very ambitious association. And I've seen it in the assignment that we received today with our panel, because we have exactly 30 minutes to discuss the regulatory framework of the future. So ambitious target, but I have a great panel and great members on the panel today to tackle these. First of all, we have James Kitching, head of football regulatory at FIFA. Second, but I should have said first, sorry, Carol, we have Carol COUSE, renowned, reputed practitioner from the UK. And last but not the least, we have Roberto Branco Martins, who is General Counsel of the European Football Agents Association, and who will, without any doubt, be able to entertain and update us on one of the most hot topics in these scheduled regulatory changes. And we will actually start with that. That is the change on regulatory framework on, as they are still called today, intermediaries. They used to be called football agents. As you know, they are part of FIFA's second reform package. And the idea today is that we have those three excellent panel members shooting questions, shooting comments, and critics or observations between them in order for you to be better informed on what's actually upcoming. Just very briefly, and then I'll hand over immediately the mic to one of the panel members. As you know, the targeted reforms on intermediaries are really in depth. They foresee the reintroduction of an agent licensing system, going along with an educational system for agents. There will be, again, a dispute resolution mechanism that will be reinstalled. We will have, obviously, the clearinghouse, which we will also tackle in the broader regulatory framework with James, the clearinghouse that will actually channel all payments regarding intermediaries. We have new regulations or targeted regulations on multiple representation, that is actually prohibition on multiple representation. And then finally, and that's perhaps the most, well, I don't know if it's the most interesting, but the most debated topic, that is the cap on agent fees. And so I suggest to give the floor immediately on the last topic to Roberto, to maybe brief us a bit on where we stand today, because we understood that we're in the midst of the consultation progress and at the verge of starting the drafting process of the regulations. Roberto, could you please, well, brief us a bit on your point of view, where we stand right now in the consultation process, and then tackle immediately, let's not waste any time, the topic on the agent fee capping. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sébastien. Thank you all, and thank you for allowing me to join this conversation. Well, you're immediately going towards the hot topics, Sébastien, and I am quite happy to answer and to give our views. But I also want to state that in general, the reform, in the opinion of EFA and connected members, was necessary, because I believe that we shared the concerns of many of the participants and stakeholders in international football, that the system that was introduced in 2015 was not serving the purpose that it initially intended to serve. And I believe that FIFA itself also had that view. So that was a good thing in general. Then if we look at the process that led to this current status quo, the consultation process, as you mentioned it, Sébastien, then I have to be formalistic now and stick to also what FIFA is aware of, and that is the situation that EFA, and with us also some other agent organizations that appear to pop up recently, have the feeling and have expressed that feeling that no proper consultation of agents has taken place. We do realize as agents that this part of the regulation of football is a part of a bigger framework, the regulation of the transfer system as such. And we do realize that agents might not have a voice that is relevant in any issue in those transfer reforms, but we believe that it would be necessary, and still believe that it's necessary, to have a proper voice and a proper consultation in the situation concerning re-regulation of agents. But maybe we can go into more detail a bit later on. Having said all that, I do have to say that the relationship with FIFA was quite good, in the sense that we had discussed a lot of issues. And maybe those issues will be touched upon later, but to focus on the issue of fee caps, the background idea of EFA was that we found it difficult to believe that a mere cap on fees of agents would serve the goal and the objective that FIFA apparently intends to have by introducing new regulations. If you look at maximizing contractual stability, if you look at trying to avoid financial malpractices in international football, then our question is, and the question still remains, if this means is these means reach those objectives, if they are proportionate enough. You know, let's start with that. In our view, it could be an idea to create maximum transparency by introducing maximum transparency in payments. Who pays what to whom in transactions? Maybe even more transparency than we have nowadays. And then if everyone must be completely transparent about what monies go to what individuals, then maybe the market will settle itself. That could be an avenue that could be followed. And by following that avenue, you could potentially avoid legal issues dealing with, let's say, competition law. But I'm quite sure that you will touch upon that later. Speaking about a cap in general, what we have seen are a number of issues. And you know, I can't grasp all of them in this this short monologue now, which hopefully open up the floor for reactions from the other panelists. So I can't go into the whole scope. But if we look at the fee caps, for example, the question is, first, as I mentioned, why the fee caps and what kind of mechanisms will be applied to those caps? How does FIFA look at it now? I'm aware that they are not set in stone yet at the moment. It's still an issue for debate. Maybe not the caps as such, but the format of the caps as such is in debate. And yeah, I think those are the issues that I would like to touch upon first. In caps in general, we believe, first of all, that caps itself, as they have been presented, are too strict. There needs to be a better consultation with the stakeholders in order to see what would best benefit the market, and potentially period towards such a cap could be assessed if another other means would reach a more proportionate goal than these caps. So that is what I would like to lay down here now.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. Carol and James, perhaps on this smoking issue immediately.
Yeah, I guess if I could just take up some of Roberto's points. So one was his question about the consultation process. One of my questions would be, what are the prerequisites to be considered to be a representative body of agents? I know there are numerous bodies pertaining to be representative bodies. Is that dependent on number of agents they represent, turnover of the agents that are active, the territory that they operate in? I think a bit of clarity would be useful on that, just in terms of, you know, the transparent way in which the consultation process is operated. With regard to the cap, I mean, I personally think there's arguably a legitimate aim of limiting the excesses within the industry, but I think it might be questionable whether the means are proportionate. I think there are less restrictive measures that could potentially be introduced. I know there's been discussion of, you know, sliding scale of caps depending on the value of commissions. Perhaps de minimis amounts could be allowed so as not to force the smaller agents out of business. I know FIFA has said that the concern is about money flowing away from the football family. So could a proposition not be making football agents part of the football family? So perhaps as a condition of their license, a percentage of their fees globally should be paid into the training fund, for example. And then just in terms of the operation of the cap as well, sort of drilling down into a bit of the detail of that, as it's announced at the moment, you know, what would happen with players who are out of contract, for example? You know, if an agent's acting for a buying club, acquiring him, then on the basis of the formula as it's set out now, they wouldn't be able to recover commission from the buying club because it wouldn't be referable to the transfer fee. Yeah, they're just a few of my initial thoughts.
obviously, James, you would like to react maybe, and then Roberto.
Oh no, Roberto can go first. I'm happy to hear Carol and Roberto.
Thank you, James. That's totally likewise, by the way. But no, just one thing that I wanted to add is, Sébastien, thank you for allowing that. You know, and if you look at caps, and if you look at the problems that FIFA intends to solve with introducing caps, at least the motivation behind it, as we've seen it in the official documentation, you know, you ask yourself, why only capping agent fees, and why not look at capping, for example, transfer fees? You know, because the transfer fees as such, and the whole circus around defining what the amount will be to buy or sell a player, you know, is also in the twilight zone. You know, and that also leads to contractual instability. You know, so why? And you know, I don't mean this in a silly way, but why blame the agent, you know, for the contractual instability, where you see also a lot of clubs, you know, in those twilight zone negotiations, you know? So that's what, so, and to make the total point, if the whole football sector would suffer, between brackets, from a cap, you know, then it would also be much easier to digest such a proposal of FIFA. Thank you, Sebastian.
James?
So I've got plenty of notes, and I'm stepping up to the plate. Before I speak, I'd like to say thank you to AIAF and also Roberto, since we last met. That is an outstanding beard, so congratulations on that one. So look, there's a few things we need to sort of cover off here, because we've gone over many different areas. The first thing is, Roberto is absolutely right. I think from FIFA's perspective, deregulation, although that was not the intention, of course, but that's ultimately what has happened. The deregulation of the, what we call now intermediaries, but let's be frank, they're football agents. The football agents industry was ultimately an error. We can see that, and the research has borne that out over the last period since agents was put back onto the transfer system task force agenda. And to clarify, the objective of introducing football agent regulations is not simply just to protect contractual stability, or just simply to eliminate abusive and what we call abusive and excessive conduct. There's a number of different objectives which we're seeking to meet, notwithstanding, of course, the original objectives of the transfer system, which still, you know, remain in place today: contractual stability, solidarity between the grassroots and the professional game, protection of minors, competitive balance, etc. But we're also looking into things such as raising professional and ethical standards for agents as an industry, as opposed to almost any individual can become an intermediary now, depending on national regulations. Limiting what we call permissible conflicts of interest. I think we can all agree that that's an objective that needs to be met in the market itself. Improving financial transparency. So on that point, which Roberto raised, it's certainly FIFA's intention. At the moment, anyway, it's certainly FIFA's intention that there will be full transparency with respect to agent commissions that are received in the market, and they will be published on an annual or a biannual basis, depending on what ultimately comes out in the regulatory framework. Player welfare, big one. Protecting player welfare. The research over the last 3 or 4 years has demonstrated, particularly younger players who are signing their first professional contract, or minors who are about to sign their first professional contract, are taken advantage of, and in the sense that the commissions we see there are quite excessive. Contractual stability, of course, as Roberto raised, is one of the issues, and one of the things that we've seen is that the market itself is based more on speculation as opposed to actual value. And one of the reasons that came out of the research for that has been the involvement of intermediaries, of football agents. And of course, what was the most prominent thing in the FIFA press release was abusive and excessive practices. And we all know the types of abusive and excessive practices that we have heard of. And we're not just talking about agents taking significant commissions from players, but also practices which bring football into disrepute. Tax evasion, criminal activity, the various things you read about involving football agents. And yeah, one bad apple or two bad apples might spoil the cart, but those are the types of things which we don't want associated with football. And so that's one of the other objectives that we are looking to meet by implementing a new regulatory framework. When we talk about consultation, it's an interesting one. I think, Carol, you touched on a good point there. Consultation process did start at FIFA before my time. I was aware of it. I have read everything that has been involved in the consultation process and have been briefed on it. The world's top agents have come to FIFA at least 4 times in 2018 before this process was put in place in the task force. Now, as you all know, the Football Stakeholders Committee and the task force is made up of representatives from 3 core stakeholders of FIFA at the moment, which are FIFPRO, Alexandra's on the call, FIFPRO, European Club Association, the World League Forum, so representing players, clubs and leagues. In future, if there was a unified international agents association, which represented agents on a global basis, I think they would be certainly welcome into that stakeholder framework, but the reality is it's not. In 2018, we had that consultation process with agents. Some principles were adopted through our formal processes with the stakeholders. And then at the start of this year, again, when I joined FIFA, there was already an intention to reopen a consultation process, which EFA and Roberto are aware of. Our problem was we're FIFA and we're meeting with organizations that represent agents. So we need to know who that organization is. So Carol, this goes to your point. We asked every agent organization that contacted us, can we have a copy of your constitution? Can we have a list of your members? Can we know your governance structure? We almost had blanket refusals to provide that information to us. So as FIFA, understanding the bona fides of the organizations that we're meeting with is a very important point to understand who they're representing, where they come from and where they stand. Notwithstanding that, we've still met with 6 or 7 different agent organizations over the past few months when we're moving into the next phase of developing the regulatory framework. So the issue from a consultation perspective, which I think, Roberto, that you're raising, is there is fractures in the agent representation. I would say it's not a market, but the agent representation of associations is effectively. There's many different associations that purport to represent agents globally or regionally or nationally. Those that have been willing, and I don't see why any association representing a group of members wouldn't be willing to provide those bona fides to FIFA. But those associations that have been willing to provide us copies of statutes, constitutions, articles of association, whatever they are, whatever they're called in your country, membership lists, so we can know who do you represent. Do you represent 5 agents who do a deal between a 5th division club in Australia and a 6th division club in New Zealand? It's never happened, by the way. Or are you representing the top agents? Are you representing the middle market, the lower market, etc.? Those are the types of things that we need to obviously see before we sit down with the group and meet with them. And I think they're perfectly reasonable things to ask for when you're FIFA and you're looking to regulate an industry. To say, look, you say you represent these people, but we want to see, can we see these documents? So from a consultation perspective, we have met with 6 or 7 different agent associations at the start of this year. Unfortunately, 2 or 3 that were invited to come to FIFA and were given an open door, pick your date, and then subsequently we set a date, decided not to come. Some decided to threaten litigation. Some continue to threaten litigation. I'm not quite sure what they're threatening litigation for at the moment, because all we have is a set of principles that have been established last year. But obviously, consultation has to be a 2-way street, and consultation is not, you consult in our way, otherwise we sue you. So I think that's also something which perhaps gets lost in the big headlines and the media that gets written in this area. So look, I'm comfortable with the consultation process that we've gone through thus far. Coming into this late in the piece, having heard from top agents over the course of 2018, having heard from the users of agents, so we're talking about leagues, clubs and players, in 2019 to develop a set of principles, and then again hearing from agents in 2020, or at least those agent groups that were willing to, show FIFA who they are, and a lot of the ideas that have come from those agent groups are now going to form part of the regulatory framework, which we're in the process of developing, which is great because we have got direct input from that market. Last thing, caps, controversial topic. I am going to, unfortunately here, there's not much I can say from a legal perspective. Like I said, we've been threatened with litigation with respect to caps in particular. So publicly, I'm not really willing to comment on the things that Carol and Roberto raised about legalities, etc., etc. All I will say is that if and when the regulations are implemented, look, I'm very comfortable with the advice that we've received with respect to the principles that were passed by the Council last year, which we're looking to develop into regulations. So Sébastien, I think that's a 3-minute summary of a very, very, very long topic. I think the three of us could debate it for the next 10 hours, but Patricia's given us a hard limit, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, James. I will just come back on two topics, and one is still on the cap, but feel free if you say that you can't comment. If I'm not mistaken, at a certain point in the process, prior to the principles being laid down, it was also considered that there could be another way of regulating, and which would actually be a more self-regulatory mechanism, whereby the principle of the player paying the agent being more promoted and installed. I know there are objections for tax reasons, obviously, to that principle, but is that, could you say something on that idea that was at a certain point on the table and obviously is not anymore, or are you not able to comment on that?
Two things I would say. One thing first, I apologize, I missed one point on my list. I'll just respond to Roberto's last point when he talked about the whole market potentially being capped, or the whole market having some kind of financial restriction on it. Without giving too much away, because there's not much to give away at the moment, but fiscal regulation is what the name of the phrase that we're using, but effectively financial regulation is on the agenda for the task force transfer system. So it's not a topic that's being avoided. There's obviously, as you saw in the data last year from the FIFA TMS Global Report, $7.35 billion was the transfer system turnover at international level. And if I can be so bold, COVID-19 really has probably highlighted the excesses of the international transfer system in football, and that, you know, there's been many comments from people with much higher pay grades than me and much nicer titles than mine about potentially a need to look at those excesses in the system. I won't say too much because Ornello is talking about fiscal regulations later on this afternoon, so please tune in, everybody. On that point there, Sébastien, about user pay, in my view, it should form part of the regulations. So if you are a player and you engage in an agent to represent you in negotiations, then our regulatory framework will say it's user pays. So that would be the player pays the agent, or if it's the club that's engaged an agent, or if it's a coach that's engaged an agent, then the user should pay for the services they receive. In what they've asked the agent to perform for them, whether it's negotiating a contract, negotiating a transfer agreement, etc., etc. So that's what I would suggest could potentially form part of the regulatory framework.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I believe Carol, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on a sort of related point, which then touches on the clearinghouse. Obviously, you know, it's key to the distribution of the training rewards, but it appears that it's also one of the final pieces in the jigsaw to ensure financial scrutiny of agents. Given the cap and the potential to perhaps work around the cap, whether by way of consultancy agreements, scouting agreements, commercial agreements, it be interesting to know if there's consideration given as to what payments will flow through the clearinghouse. Is it going to be just pure transfer related payments, or could the scope stretch to, you know, commercial deals, perhaps the scouting and consultancy arrangements?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, Carol. Look, when it comes to clearinghouse and agents, it's still very early days. Policy in that respect is not being drafted as yet, because we still have to get it up and running first, training rewards. When it comes to agent regulatory framework, I think if we look at PIAO, the decision was taken some time ago, it becomes a question of what can be regulated in the activities of a sports agent by an organization like FIFA. So I would suggest, and I think this is what will end up coming out in the framework, that it will be limited to, you know, obviously direct football agent activity. So other kinds of services that an agent might provide to a client, whether that if the agent happens to be a lawyer, legal advice in other areas of their business activities, or if they happen to have a financial planning background or an accounting background or whatever it might be, estate planning or real estate or whatever it could be. I don't think those are things which would fall within the scope of FIFA regulation. I think we can all agree that. But in saying that, obviously there becomes an enforcement issue, because if there is a 3% cap on commission, then if an agent's receiving $100 million, and okay, I'm exaggerating, but an agent receiving $100 million for advising on a trust deed, you know, and there's 1% being provided for negotiating an employment contract, obviously there's an issue. So there will be a disclosure and transparency requirement when it comes to other activities that an agent might provide to a client, much like any, I'd say, related party transaction that you might find in some other type of regulation. But there will be a disclosure requirement, and obviously we will be policing that and intend to police that very thoroughly to ensure that there's no circumvention of the regulations. So there will be so I think that's necessary. It's necessary because you're implementing a system which requires obviously some form of trust, but also we're going into a system where our research has shown that there are sort of standard practices which are not feasible to upholding the good reputation of football. So we have to go in there hard at first to ensure that the regulatory framework that we're putting in place is both enforced and enforceable to ensure that our objectives are met. So there will be a disclosure requirement, but we, you know, obviously are limited in what we can and cannot regulate in the activities of a sports agent or football agent.
Hey, Roberto.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Sébastien, for just letting me react to that. A couple of things in reaction to James and indirectly to Carol. First, in relation to the process of consultation, James, if you want a certain result, then it's also tactically some motivations are necessary to find out in what way a question could be or should be asked if you want a particular answer. And in that perspective, you know, I would like to say, if you ask organizations to send over statutes and memberships and whatever information, I do understand, you know, that it's necessary to have that information before you start a formal process. But it's also interesting for those organizations to know why they would then appear at the table, you know, under what conditions and what will be discussed. So I think we got lost in semantics back and forth, you know, in a couple of months ago. I think we were in going towards a very good direction when it came to, you know, finding an approach. Yeah, it depends also on the question of why you need those statutes. You know, from our perspective, it was interesting to know what we could expect if we would go and sit around the table together with you. Because at the moment that you send formal statutes and all other kind of documents, you know, you can't deny that you enter into a process of formal consultation and formal talks. And if then the actual talks are something that you didn't want to discuss or not to discuss in that way as a stakeholder, you know, you see the discrepancy there with the intention and with the actual outcome. So I believe that before that question, there is a process, and we were on, you know, the avenue of leading towards the outcome of that process. But in the middle of the road, we had some hiccups, but that might be something that we have to discuss one-on-one and not in such a panel. But it does give an impression about the consultations and questions that were asked to the organizations. Okay, having said that, also concerning consultation and membership, James, take into consideration that it was quite easy to define the group of agents before 2015, you know, because you had a huge register with all the licensed agents in there, and the actual people that were agents, you know, were registered as agents and were carrying out the profession. Then in 2015, the whole system changed. And what is a representative organization? We don't even know what an agent is, you know, because we're not speaking about agents, we speak about intermediaries. So that's already a practical difficulty, you know, that leads us, you know, with some headaches, because, you know, I can say I represent 1,200 agents, you know, and I can give you the whole structure. But then again, you can answer and say, no, those are intermediaries, you know, they only register and they're not proper agents in the way we believe they are agents, you know. So again, semantics, I think that's very important to discuss. It is a crucial issue. Essential is also, and I was a little bit surprised by what you mentioned concerning the scope of the regulation. Maybe I misunderstood when it comes to disclosure. I understand that if you know, the essential point I'm trying to make is, what does an agent do? You know, up until now, every regulation, and trust me, I've studied hundreds of FA regulation, national FAs and FIFA regulations, the far majority focus on international job placement. You know, the intention of regulating the activities of intermediaries is to regulate activities dealing with job placement. I am the middleman in contract negotiations concerning a player and concerning a club, or concerning two clubs in relation to transfer. It all deals with job placement and job activities. So within that scope, FIFA has the authority to regulate. The big problem concerning transparency is that football agents have far more activities than purely job placement activities. So that leaves FIFA also with a sort of a vacuum when trying to regulate agents as such, you know, because what is happening now, because of this system that we see in front of us, you see agents, you know, maybe the bigger agents in the market, you know, trying to go forum shopping to find the best contractual and legal framework, you know, to carry out the business the way they want to. And sometimes maybe even going under the radar of FIFA, because maybe the scope is too wide. You know, so when I speak about, I don't have the golden answer or the $100,000 answer now, but I do think that is something crucial that you need to take into consideration when regulating the profession of agents. And especially if you're now saying, okay, if you have like adjacent contracts, you know, dealing with other issues, but touching upon the stuff that we want to regulate, we want them disclosed, that can be quite problematic, you know. I'm not...
Okay, Roberto, I'm sorry. Obviously, the two of you can go on for some time. I think point taken. We have little time left. I would like to tackle just two minor points on the agents, and then hopefully briefly be able to say something about the other regulatory reforms. The first one is on prohibition of multiple representation. And we have a question also in the panel from Victor Eleuterio on that. What drove FIFA so far in still upholding the dual representation, or allowing dual representation between an agent representing a player and the buying club of that player, and then prohibiting the rest? Maybe James, you could quickly comment on that, because it's obviously something that is of interest to our attendees.
Sure. Very quickly, thanks for the question, Victor, by the way. Very quickly, again, the principle behind this is in effect, the agent that is acting on behalf of a player in a buying club in the same transaction is effectively acting in the interests of both parties. They have aligned interests in that respect. So that's why it would be seen as permissible. Whereas in other types of overlap, or say multiple representation, I should say, interests are not aligned of the parties in the transaction. So that's the simple answer. There's a much more complex answer, but Sébastien doesn't have much time for the complex answer. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Indeed, Carol, you want to comment on that or not specifically?
No, I
Okay.
did have another comment on clearinghouse, but I'm not sure whether I've got time.
Okay, well, let me then just jump to the last question regarding the agents, and which might be of interest to clients of all attorneys here attending the seminar being agents. There is going to be, again, a system of licensing through an examination, as we understand correctly, unless mistaken. Can you provide some more information already on that? Because we have the ones that were actually registered as FIFA agents up till March 2015. Then we have the intermediaries with, let's agree, very little requirements due since 2015. And now we are going to have, as of 21, a new system. So do you have any indication on what will be this kind of certifying tool? And what will happen with those who actually were considered as agent, respectively, intermediary up till now? Can you come?
Okay, yeah, very quickly, as quick as I can. The idea is that there will be a FIFA license issued. And so it would be a global license issued by FIFA, so there will be no need to obtain national licenses. There is a web exam that will be reintroduced. The timing and the number of exams each year is still being worked out, and that will come out in the regulatory framework. For those agents that were before 2015, for those individuals that are looking to register as agents again, and that were agents before 2015. Right now, what we are looking at is there would not be a requirement for them to resit an exam. However, they would still need to meet what we call the pre-requirements, or what I call the character requirements, so that, you know, your standard fit and proper person type requirements that you would require someone to meet when they are looking to act on behalf of another person. In saying that, I should say that obviously someone who may have been an agent before 2015, you know, there may have to be a cutoff at some point from a date perspective. You know, if someone was a licensed agent in 2006, for example, doesn't mean they may be exempted from the exam. So there's a lot more detail than that, but I've only got 10 seconds, so that's all I'll leave for now.
Okay, thank you. Carol, perhaps one word on the clearinghouse.
Yeah, so if I could just pick up on that point as well, just in terms of the FIFA licensing. Obviously now there's going to be an impact in terms of what the national federations are doing. Previously, you know, licenses were issued by the national federations. The national federations would then have jurisdiction to hear disputes and discipline. So say, for example, we have an English player, an English club and an English agent, then ultimately it's envisaged that those disputes would go to FIFA, potentially to the CAS. So in, say, 2 years' time, you know, Swiss law is going to govern a dispute which was a totally domestic matter. It just, so yeah, something that perhaps the, you know, the parties wouldn't envisage at the outset, and just, I guess, the mechanics of how that is going to be managed. Obviously, one of the reasons for the deregulation was the workload at FIFA, and you know, what the body is going to look like that's going to hear these disputes, and the disciplinary matters. Is there going to be equal representation of the parties? I appreciate, you know, these are things to be considered, but it'd be interesting to see how these bodies are are formed. And then in terms of kind of the education and continuing professional development, just, you know, a query as to whether there are going to be territory specific requirements for that. You'd think that it might be good practice that agents would know or have an awareness of, you know, relevant laws in jurisdictions where they act in terms of bribery, corruption, money laundering, that sort of thing. You know, would that be encompassed within, you know, the education, or is it just going to be on a global basis? There's a harmonized approach to things and it's very high level stuff. And then I guess my final thought is, you know, national laws obviously operate in some jurisdictions to regulate agents, like in France. And how does that then impact on the harmonized approach to the regulation of agents?
Yeah, lots of questions. Are you sure you weren't sitting in the room when we invited the member associations to consult on the regulations? Because I'm pretty sure I heard every single one of those questions from the MAs. Very quickly, disputes, international dimension. National dimension will still be handled at national level. Disciplinary, international dimension. However, if a case comes to FIFA's attention and is not dealt with appropriately at national level or within a certain amount of time, then the idea is that FIFA will then take disciplinary action. I've forgotten the rest of your things because I didn't write them down, sorry. They were the two big ones I remembered.
Is there going to be equal representation of parties at the... Is there going to be a standalone body to hear matters,
yep.
or is it going to be...
The idea currently is that there will be an agent dispute system within FIFA, which is independent. That may change. I think that's something which still needs to be discussed in the ongoing reform of potentially the whole FIFA dispute system. You know, what works from an efficiency and a streamlining process. But at the moment, it's separate. That's what's proposed to be separate. In terms of who sits on that body, that's TBC. I can't tell you right now, I don't know. Something to work out in the meantime. Ongoing education is online. CPD requirements will be provided in the regulations. There will be a set number depending on if you're an agent before 2015 or after 2015. There will be additional requirements if you wish to represent minors, if that's permitted, in assisting them sign their first professional contracts. There'll be safeguarding training, etc., etc. There was one other question. I apologise, Carol.
National laws, if they regulated the profession of agents.
This is an interesting one because I think what you described there's certainly 2 or 3 very big countries, and I know Roberto's organisation and Roberto would have worked in many of these jurisdictions where there's legislation which regulates, or legislation which discusses sports agents or football agents, depending on how it is. Some of our biggest supporters were those MAs that have that legislation when we went through a consultation process with the MAs. So it's quite interesting to see how that would fit within their framework. But we've got support that they will work with us at national level to harmonise as they can see fit, or make what we come up with work within that structure. So I think that's the 10-second answer to every question. Sorry.
Did well, thank you, James.
Thank you, James. We have, unless Rona contradicts me, 5 minutes left to tackle the entire other topic of regulatory framework within FIFA. I did have one additional question even on what about lawyers acting as agents, and without surprise, this question comes from France, where they have the statute of avocat mandataire sportif. I don't know if any of you wants to tackle that. Besides, on the more general topic of the regulatory, we had topics on the loans, the training rewards within the second reform package. And then obviously we have the third one coming up with the minors, the squad sizes, the transfer windows, the fiscal regulations. Well, all 3 of you, you have 5 minutes left, 4 minutes, 30 left. I don't know if either of you wants to pick one of those topics and have a final question? Maybe Roberto, you can start.
Sebastian, can I say one thing? Sorry, and then I'll shut up the rest of the call. Luis Perez, the head of intermediaries, discussed this last week in the Footballer Annual Review. Lawyers will be required to obtain FIFA agent's license. So there will be no exemption as there was previously. Now I'm out.
Clear answer. Thank you. Roberto?
Okay, Sebastian, I just, if you allow me, one more issue, and I want to thank Carol also for raising all those issues. Also from a practical perspective, it deals with the registration of representation contracts. You know, if you work as an agent in the international football world, one of the most difficult things is protecting, you know, the players that you represent, because you see a lot of agents not trying to tap up, and then you see the issue of how can we get as much protection as possible for the contract that we have concluded. And then some agents, you know, intend to register their contracts even if they're not, even if the player is not playing in that country, if it's registered in that country, you know. So there's a big confusion about what is the status of that contract and what happens if I register it at an association. Am I protected or not? You know, so that's an interesting issue to look at it. Okay, in general, Sebastian, I can say just one general thing in relation to the FIFA regulations, because, you know, to go into detail about every single topic now will be too difficult. What I do recognize and what I see in the regulations that come from FIFA from the last 2 years, I think there is more emphasis on the respect of national labor laws and or collective bargaining agreements. And you know, I would be interested to find out also from James if that you know, what is the background for including that so explicitly in those regulations? Was it purely FIFPRO, you know, to push that in because they have this labor background? And don't you think that all of these topics that you just mentioned now, you know, from loan periods to fiscal issues, if a member association would find it difficult or would be reluctant to implement it, they would just purely organize it on a national level? Don't you open up a can of worms by including these referrals into that regulation? Or is it merely just realization from the side from FIFA that you can't supersede those national contracts? So I try to, Sebastian, I try to give an overall view because I can't deal with every individual.
I know, James, you said that you wouldn't speak anymore. As lawyers would say that you have the right to remain silent, but you may also comment. Otherwise, the last word is for Carol.
It deals with the transfer system in general.
Maybe I'll let Carol speak, and then I can give 30 seconds answer to Roberto on any question Carol might have.
Okay. Yeah, I think then it's a related point if I go with Roberto's high level comments. You know, just in terms of the solidarity mechanism, obviously today's the first day, I think, yes, 1st of July, for the implementation of solidarity in respect of national transfers with the international dimension. And I think on the one hand, you know, it's absolutely applauded that, you know, FIFA has introduced this to reward the training clubs. I think of, you know, big money transfers in the UK where training clubs haven't been rewarded, you know, likes of Virgil van Dijk, Lukaku, Mahrez, you know, 75 million plus, and then the training clubs aren't getting that money. But just from a technical point, obviously there's a real shift, isn't there? Previously there had been that carve out for, you know, domestic transfers or purely domestic matters to be determined, you know, by domestic bodies, by the national federations. Is it an encroachment on the national federation's autonomy? And it just goes to Roberto's point again, sort of that shift. There seems to be a bit of shifting sand really between what's domestic and what falls within the national remit and what falls within FIFA's jurisdiction. A slight blurring of the lines, but perhaps it's because of the more interventionist sort of policy shift as a result of the new administration.
Okay. 2 points very quickly, Sebastian, if possible. Yes. One, look, CBAs came into the FIFA regulations before my time, so I can't talk as to how they were incorporated into the regulations. But I think when you have social partners that have collectively bargained for certain terms and conditions on a league basis, then I think this should be respected. This should absolutely be respected when that is in place. So I don't think that is an encroachment or a differentiation from how FIFA works when it resolves contractual disputes. Carol, on your point, I would watch what I'm saying here, but I'll try to be as blunt as possible, but also as diplomatic as possible. I don't think that when you read the regulations themselves, and when you look into what the regulations say, well, it does say the FIFA RSTP govern international transfers, and then it goes on to say that domestic transfers are governed at national level by regulations established by each association. You then have to read the next article, which talks about the mandatory requirements in the RSTP, which must be incorporated into national regulations. And so at that point, I think there is a blur. It's not a split of international domestic. There is a blur because there are mandatory requirements in the FIFA regs, which must be implemented at national level without any amendment. And so those particular principles are universal globally. So I would say there's a little bit of a blur there when it comes to that split. And so from a solidarity mechanism perspective, look, I take a very bullish and pragmatic approach, and I think it's long overdue that training clubs can benefit from domestic transfers from sophisticated football markets which pay high domestic transfer fees and be rewarded for training young players. That ultimately goes back to one of those core objectives of the transfer system, which is solidarity between the grassroots and professional. So that's my 10-second answer.
Okay, thank you to the three of you. It was, of course, very interesting, passionate, although impossible to tackle everything within this short time frame. We knew it, we tried, but I think we had a very interesting exchange of thoughts. I'm going to pass on now to Saleh, who will speak about the contracts of tomorrow. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, Carol, and Roberto. Thank you, Sébastien. We are now going to tackle the second roundtable with Saleh, ALOBEIDLI, Ricardo, CARDOSO, Stefano Laporta, and Alexandra Gomez from FIFPRO. Hi, Ornella.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hi. I'm going to stop your video right now. I'm sorry, Ornella, just to give the floor to the panelists of the second roundtable. See you very soon.
See you.
Saleh is arriving. Saleh, hi Saleh.
Hi.
And Alexandra also is arriving.
I'm already. Oh, I thought I had to be out of the video.
All right.
So here I am.
Saleh, you have the floor, Saleh.
Stefano's here.
Yes, here I am.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear colleagues, dear friends. We shall start now the roundtable number 4 with a very interesting title, Negotiating and Drafting Tomorrow's Contract. So, and with more interesting, we will have a very distinguished panel with the 3 very well experienced football lawyers. We have with us Stefano Laporta, football lawyer from Italy and a colleague of mine at AIAF. We also have Alexandra Gomez, our friend from FIFPRO, legal counsel at FIFPRO. And we have Ricardo Cardoso from Portugal and also a member of AIAF. I mean, this is the second roundtable of today, and yesterday there were also very interesting roundtable discussions. And all the discussions around the general topic of the impact of the current COVID-19. But maybe we have some, I see the attendees are changing the numbers, so maybe we have some new attendees. So before I move to the panel, and just to make sure all our attendees of this roundtable has the right background, especially who might just joined now. So very briefly and by way of introduction, as everyone may know, this current health emergency issues and its impact, it's been debated heavily by all football stakeholders, national level and of course international level and national level. And the major discussion was surrounding the issue of the force majeure. So many questions have been asked whether a contract related to football, what will happen to those contracts? Will the parties decide now, from now on, to insert a force majeure clause in their contract? So whether it's needed or just a reference to the applicable law is enough. Whether the current employment contract of coaches, players, whether it's possible to like have a draft clause related to, for example, very practical, the current issues like of suspending the league. And in this case, whether the employer activity will be reduced. So with the different payment conditions related to the employment getting reduced. So many questions have been raised and asked by different stakeholders. The same also can apply on the sponsorship agreements, image rights agreement, and TV rights agreement. So this is just a quick background. I think I should stop here and give the floor to our speakers. We are going to start with Stefano Laporta. Stefano, from your point of view, how will the pandemic affect the negotiations of tomorrow's contract? The mic with you, Stefano.
Thank you very much, Saleh. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The title of our roundtable is about tomorrow's contracts. Actually, I would say that this is an issue that we're facing today already. So we should maybe change the title into how to address today's contracts, because it's a reality that at the time being, we are all busy with something new that the whole football family had never experienced in the past. And that, of course, is somehow affecting the negotiations for new contracts, the negotiations for the existing contracts. And in any case, is something that is forcing us all to take into consideration the fact that unlike in the past, there is something different from an armed conflict that can prevent the ordinary course of football competitions. And this is something, of course, that is new for all of us, and that probably none of us has addressed in the past carefully, or at least carefully enough in order to avoid any kind of issue today. So I believe that just to give a general introduction of our roundtable, I believe that in negotiating and drafting today's contracts again, it will be necessary to take into consideration some specific circumstances that may affect, as we have seen, the ordinary development and the ordinary running of competitions. And so I believe that when dealing with when dealing with today's contracts, all players, all clubs and all leagues and agents will have to take into consideration some factors that were unpredictable before. It is, for instance, I'm talking from Italy, and it is yesterday's news, just to give you an example of what might happen. It is yesterday's news that B Series club, so the second professional division in Italy, just denied the extension of some players' contracts due to expire yesterday on June the 30th, due to the position in the official ranking of the B Series, given that the club was very close to the mathematical relegation to the lower division. And basically what happened is that a quite important number of players have come out of contract yesterday, and they will not be lined up during next games due to the fact that their contract has expired. And the club has just denied any kind of extension in order to save money, basically, given that the position in the ranking was compromised finally. And this, of course, raised some concerns by the Sports Prosecutor's Office. They started an investigation because they are afraid that something as such might be detrimental for the integrity of the competition, of course, because all games played by the team in the following and the remaining duration of the championship will be affected by the fact that the team will be left without half of the first squad. And of course, this is an issue. So turning back to the need to probably enrich the general and standard clauses used and adopted in drafting the contracts, I believe that, for instance, in terms of players' contracts, something like this will be necessary in order to address specifically what is the CBAs and what is local laws. During the previous roundtable, I heard about the application of CBAs to contracts. And of course, I believe that especially during international litigation, it will be very difficult to evaluate and to understand exactly what CBAs and what local labor law provide for such a unique case that may be considered force majeure, depending on what the local legislation says about it. So I believe that in the future contracts, we will see some hypotheses being made explicit in contracts in order to address the consequences that may arise from the occurrence of something like the COVID-19 we've experienced or something like that. And again, I believe that it will be in the interest of all the parties of contracts to address exactly what kind of remedies can the parties seek in case something prevent the ordinary course of the championship. And recently I've seen something like this, not only in players' contracts, but also, for instance, in sponsorship agreements, when sponsors ask for the insertion of specific clauses to address the consequences of a possible interruption or suspension or extension or whatever, a change in the, let's say, in the expected format of competitions. And I believe, again, that this should be done, and it will be done for the benefit of all parties involved. And of course, the kind of consequences and the kind of remedies and the kind of outcomes that can come out of this kind of new techniques of negotiation and of new techniques of drafting contracts should, of course, be balanced in order to protect the interests of all parties involved, both in terms of termination, right to terminate the contract, for instance, or also in terms of right to unilaterally change the content of the contract. And of course, contracts should be quite accurate in order to avoid any kind of doubts and any kind of ambiguity, especially again during international litigation. Just a last remark from my side. Of course, I believe that the general principles of good faith, reasonableness, and proportionality should always be the pillars for the solution of any issue when we have to face something like COVID-19. But I really expect the parties of future contracts to explain in details how those principles should be applied when drafting the next contracts. And by saying this, I thank you all again, and I leave the floor to the next speakers. And thank you, Saleh. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefano. Very interesting, interesting opening. You already raised lots of points that needs to discuss in more details, but we will move to our second speaker, Alexandra. Alexandra, from the player's contract perspective, what is your view on the suspension of salaries, on duration and terms of the contract? And also, if you may also add your view on the force majeure discussion these days.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So thank you so much to AIAF for the invitation and for always considering the position of FIFPRO. That's really appreciated. And regarding this topic, this is of course a hot topic for us. You can imagine the amount of calls that we've received from our members, the player associations in different countries all around the world. Calls directly from players as well, with different issues, with different offers, with different things being imposed of them, different modifications of contracts being imposed of them. So during this period, we have seen a variety of solutions taken in different parts of the world. Some, in my view, reasonable, some not. I think it was really good, at least in intention, of FIFA to draft these guidelines and the frequently asked questions afterwards, in order to try to give a little bit a route or something to follow to their members and to all the stakeholders. And I think the core part of those guidelines and what should have been followed and should still be followed is the part of the negotiation, right? So first of all, parties have to sit together and try to find a solution. And it should not be rocket science. But in my view, it's a little bit disappointing to see how many times this was not the case, and a club would just come and unilaterally inform the player that he would get 20%, 30% of his salary due to the COVID-19 and the lockdown or the situation in the country. And this with any previous conversation or whatever. There were also other examples, the good examples that help you keep on having faith in the system, where parties sat together, they negotiated collectively, the Players Association with the Federation together with the league, and they thought, okay, we all understand this is a situation that affects everyone. That is something that I also wanted to express. It's not the players associations or FIFPRO, the Global Players Union. It's not our thought like, oh, okay, you can never touch our salaries because we're employees and then we're protected and we just will pretend that nothing is happening. Of course, we understand the impact of this, but the impact is not the same everywhere. So it's not the same in every country. It's not the same in every city. It's not the same in every club. So something that is fundamental in order to sit and negotiate the way you should is to have all the information. So how can you negotiate a reduction in your salary, which sometimes, and I've seen various examples of propositions of salary reductions for years because of this COVID situation. How can you propose that if you do not show your numbers as a club and explain, listen, this used to be my income, this is my income now, and it's all connected to COVID, not because I mismanaged my my monies. So as I said, we also have from the good examples. It was mentioned, I think, yesterday as well, but it happened, for example, in Costa Rica, where they sat together and they tried to find a solution with the Players Association, the Federation, the clubs, and they almost immediately after the breakout already had a plan. And then, of course, you can agree or not whether it was too much or too little or whatever, but okay, the national stakeholders agreed that for the situation in the country and in the clubs, that was the most suitable solution. And what was good about that deal was that they also did not agree on a certain percentage of reduction for every player, but they looked, of course, at the salaries, because it's not the same to get a 50% reduction if you earn 400 euros than if you earn 300,000. It's because you can live pretty okay with 150,000, I guess, per month, not with 200. So yeah, I think that let's say if we think of the future and what will happen what should happen as from now, from my point of view, and this is also the example that FIFA is giving by drafting these guidelines and inviting the stakeholders, the international stakeholders, to also provide their input, is this is something that has to be negotiated, get together at national level, and come up with solutions that are suitable for everyone. So yeah, I think one thing that came to light with this crisis was something that we, of course, as FIFPRO already knew, because we had the information, the direct information from the players, but that maybe was not so evident in the system, is the mismanagement of clubs, how the administration, I mean the wrong administration of the funds of the clubs. So we saw a lot of clubs that by the time that COVID started in the country, they already had many months of salary arrears, so not really connected to COVID, and then they were terminating their contract because of the COVID situation, and without, of course, paying the overdue salaries. But yeah, as I was saying, I think that the most important thing is within a CBA structure, if possible, and if it's not so developed in the country, in order to have a proper CBA, at least to get the stakeholders together and negotiate, but as I was saying, negotiate with transparency, considering the situation of all the stakeholders, considering the amount of the salaries of the players, and also considering some global principles. We need to understand that, be it football or not, the relationship is an employment relationship. There is an employer and there's an employee, and the rights are for both, of course, but there is a subordination, and we cannot treat them exactly equally. So there's a protection for the employee that needs to prevail. This comes from international law. And I think it's really important to consider. And regarding, I wanted to mention that regarding the guidelines of FIFA, it's very important that when the different stakeholders or lawyers using them take a bit or a paragraph, that they really look at the whole document to understand the gist of it. Because there is in certain moments expressions that if you just look at the paragraph, it seems like an order, like FIFA is saying, okay, in this case it's fine if you reduce the salary, but that's not the intention. It's not what the document says. So I think it's very important to look at the document as a whole, to understand that also when we were referring before to the application of national legislation, that what these guidelines say is that will only be considered in order to look at the modification of the contract. So it's not something that will impact the consequences on termination or whatever when the bodies like the DRC or PSC are going to give a decision. But just, I don't want to extend too much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you very much. Maybe we come back to you later about, because FIFPRO were always invited by FIFA to represent the interest of the players. And as you say, the FIFA guidelines, if it's read correctly, entirely, it might have different meaning than just directly cut the salary of the players. Now we will move to Ricardo with the area that I understand Ricardo is specialized in, which is the image rights. So Ricardo, would you please give us your view on this very specific and interesting area, I think, for the future contracts, or as Stefano called it, from today's contract? Moving on.
Oh, thank you, Saleh. I would like to thank Patricia and Ronan. And before sharing with everyone some suggestions to take in account when negotiating image rights contract and mostly drafting image contracts, it's important to leave some brief ideas about what it is the image rights. It's said because we have a first problem to define the concept of image rights. We have, for example, in US, you have an image right as a publicity right. It's one way to see this topic. In Europe, in continental Europe, we have under the personality right. So it's different, and that explains the problems that we face, for example, in Spain and France with process about the exploitation about image rights. So the nature of the image rights are very important to comprehend the difficulties and the way that the authorities look at the image rights. And we have in UK, we don't have an image rights concept, but for the tax purpose, the UK system treat the image rights separately. So it's the first difficulty is the different way to see the image rights, and obviously the different way to look at the infringement of the image rights. So before we share some suggestions to the new contracts, the new clauses, the old clauses with the new view, I think it's important to take a look at the concept. What we are protecting with image rights. So in some places we have a tight concept, but in other countries we have a broader concept who includes the avatar of the players, for example, the silhouette, the way that the players move. So I think that the most important thing when we are negotiating and drafting the contracts beyond the players, beyond the clubs, is define what we understand, the parties understand, which are the concept of image rights. So it's the first step. But I want to share with all. We have only, I think it's the only place in the world we have the guarantee system, which is a system who register image rights. I think some of the UK clubs register its own image rights as a club, and I think it could be an interesting example for the future, because I think in the future we will need to get autonomous and unique regime to protect image rights. I think FIFPRO knows about this issue very well, because the European Convention of Human Rights have a specific right to protect this image. It's a different approach, but I think there is some initiatives, very interesting initiatives, to protect these image rights. I remember the Universal Declaration of the Players' Rights. It is not a legal, we cannot impose this, but it's a sign to all of the players. And we look at players on FIFA side, on FIFPRO, on the agents, on the clubs, on the brands, to look at this difficult to move this concept. And so with these difficulties is very important to make the best clauses in the contracts, because when we have a player from Spain who plays in United Kingdom and he signs a contract with Adidas or Nike under the UK law or the Swiss law, we have to manage first of all a different concept and a different protection. So I think the most important thing to do when we draft is to look at this, but we have some practical issues. I think this pandemic situation gave us a different perspective of all that can happen in our world. So for the players, there is, I don't know how the clubs are paying the image rights contracts to the players, because normally they pay twice at a year, and we don't have a correlation between the training and playing with the payment of image rights. But we know that almost all cases of the image rights that they are drafting and signing with clubs are for compose the salary net or gross incomes for the players. So I don't know how the clubs we will manage this issue under the pandemic situation. So some clauses are very interesting on the present and on the future. I think that the morality clauses, I think is a very important clause. We can remember about Tiger Woods' process. We don't have a criminal offense, but for the companies who explore the image rights, this is very important. This is the most important thing. So take a look at this kind of clauses. I think almost important as this is the definition I will talk anti-embarrassment clauses. I think we're going to have some problems in courts and outside the courts to look at of these clauses. The wider brand sector partnership, how we're going to manage an image rights contract signed by a player with the club, but the club have a top 5 sponsors. How we deal with this? How we deal that the player is a Nike player, but the club is Adidas club, for example. So these kind of clauses, we must pay attention for this. And then the sponsor market and the carve-out restriction of right in relation to the players' managed rights. This is a topic, a difficult topic, because when we look at for example, the UK system, the player can move his own, all of his own image rights to a company, but after that company can make several agreements for a geographic pyramid with some products, and all of this can be managed. If we look at the Spanish situation, it's very different. I must say again, it depends the country and the way that country looks at the image right as a personality right or a publicity right. So these are the main topics about image rights. I think, as I say, we have some legal restrictions with the gambling industry, the image rights of the player, and we must take in account this kind of limitations and the social consideration audience. I think I looked 1 month ago to a contract who says that the brand company can cease the contract if the home company unilaterally thinks that the tax approach of the player is not a good approach. It doesn't matter if it's legal or not. So these kind of clauses we don't have in the past, but I think in the present and the future we will have, and we will discuss before the courts and under the courts. I think this is the main topics that I want to share with all.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Ricardo. Ronan, I don't know if we have some questions. Otherwise,
we don't actually.
We can continue or if Alexandra or Stefano would like to comment maybe on the image rights points of view from Ricardo. Otherwise, I have a question as well. Maybe I'll start with this point then. This is for Ricardo or also any other one, because especially during the quarantine, during this health issues, where everyone was at home, we have seen much more use of social media, even among players, celebrities, and in general, from everyone. So the use of social media or gaming platform, I have just general thoughts. Maybe Ricardo or anyone can give his point of view. I mean, as you just mentioned, there might be a sponsor for the club, a competitor, a sponsor for one of the player, or even in the relationship between the players and his sponsor or the image rights party. In case the player have posted a tweet or something that might be against or considered not appropriate for his sponsor or maybe even his club. I have another point actually in that matter. Do you think that, I don't know if nowadays there or in the future, that some like the holder of the image rights or the sponsor might sign with a player for the use of his social media account? So instead of the player writing and posting, that company or that sponsor will take this role and will be using the personal social media account in his favor. So do you think that we might see contracts like this, or we might see similar clauses in image rights contract or sponsor contract?
Saleh is a very good point, and at almost situations we have that kind of clauses that prohibits the players, for example, to express a different opinion about not only the way of the club is playing, the coaches, and we have some penalties, and it depends on the importance of the player, of course. But some of them are very discussable under this principle that we have other rights to express our opinion. I don't know how this will be managed, but in my opinion, some of these clauses are not passing in court, because we need to protect the essential of the personality of the player. It's not only a player, it's a person who needs to express what he thinks. This is not usual in football, mainly in football, but if we look at the soccer in the US with the women's behavior beyond court, with some legal actions very interesting about protecting these image rights. I know the structure of the sport in US are different, but look, in US we have the women competition and the men's competition born at the same time. So we can learn with this development. So in my opinion, we have that kind of clauses with the huge penalties, but I think when, I don't know when, but I think in the near future, we will have some discussions in courts and arbitration about the legality of these clauses, and I think the clubs will not have so the possibility to make this kind of open clauses to decide what is the opinion of the player. A different thing, and it happens, is the player to make a contract with a specialized media company. It's normal. It's normal for the top players, and I think it's not a bad thing, because sometimes we need to manage our image, and sometimes talk right after a game is not the best solution for the players and for the clubs. And with the social media, we can react almost on time at the end of the game. So it's a different view. I just want to say that in a broader concept of the image rights, we include this kind of social media data. We can discuss in Europe mainly about the data protection new order, and I think it's a very interesting topic to harmonize this kind of image rights and impact in sports and football mainly with the data protection new rules under the European Union.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you.
May I comment, Saleh?
Yes, of course. And we have a question for you after this.
Okay. No, well, I agree with what Ricardo was explaining. I mean, so we tend to forget this happens especially in football, I think, that the player is a person. So he's not only there kicking or she a ball, they are a person, and they have, of course, all the right to express themselves. And naturally there are limitations, and you cannot go and insult people or whatever, but well, that is just a common sense, I would say. But they have been limited in their contracts many times to just say anything. And not even anything about the clubs, but sometimes anything about many other topics that are not really connected to the clubs, which is, I mean, actually, I think that those clauses that would end up in a court would always be considered null and void, right? Because they are abusive. But the fact that they are there shows how sick the whole system in many ways is. So of course, every party and players need to take responsibility for their acts. So of course it will depend on what happens. So I'm not just saying like you can go and do whatever you want, but I think it's interesting what Ricardo was mentioning about women football. I've seen much more expression of their feelings, of their principles, of what they believe in many women players. They just go for it. Whether male players have done it maybe in a lesser degree, which can be explained by the fact that they have been in the market for longer and they know what could happen to them eventually, because of course not every dispute, not every problem ends up in an international dispute resolution system or in the FIFA DRC. So it's not like the player has a guarantee that if he does that he will be fine. But you do see, I think that is a really interesting point. You do see much more in depth. I mean, comparing the speech of Rapinoe with the speech of Messi, for example, when they won the best player, and this is not like a criticism or anything, it's just like an objective analysis. It's so different. I think it's really interesting to see, and I think that it will probably develop. For example, now with the whole reaction worldwide on racism, we saw a lot of players, and here male and female, reacting really clearly towards it, talking, saying things that, you know, you need some courage to say. And I think that I think it's changing. I think this, it maybe because of or helped by, maybe helped by the social media, but that players are finding a channel to really express themselves. And also this myth that we've always heard, that the players don't know better. They just go and kick the ball, and they don't have anything deep to say, is fading, and they're showing that they also have things to say and show. So I think it's a really interesting development, and I'm really looking forward to what is to come, because they can really be game changers.
Thank you, Alexandra. There is an interesting question actually addressed to you from the audience, from a colleague of us, Daniel Luis. Maybe I shall say the question so everyone can hear it as well. In some countries, the national FA gave the clubs the right to impose salary reduction up to a specific certain percentage on the wages of the national players belonging to this national FA, where the national FA judicial bodies have jurisdiction. What is your take on this? Also, can the club impose the same percentage of reduction, of salary reduction on the international player to ensure proportionality and equal treatment between all the players, in line, let's say, with FIFA guidelines? What is your opinion?
So yeah, no. So that's not in line with the FIFA guidelines. It's definitely not, and this is a little bit what I wanted to address. I think that it's maybe because of course, this is new, and these guidelines are rather new, although the first ones are already from April. But I really encourage everyone to go into these guidelines and read them all, like from beginning to end, and then read the frequently asked questions to really grasp what is being said there. So nowhere there it's being said that the salaries can unilaterally be reduced. And even if in a certain country an FA authorizes that, that's wrong, because that should be collectively negotiated with the national stakeholders. So that FA is not acting in accordance to the FIFA standards. So they should not impose it on the national players, and they should not impose it on international players. And those international players, if they can go to the DRC, and probably they can, because in an FA like that, probably there's no NDRC that is compliant with circulars 1010 and 1129. So probably that international player will have recourse in the DRC. I'm pretty sure that that reduction will not be considered.
Hi, Alexandra. If I may just add a couple of points on this. It's a fact. Some of the national federation, they do allow the clubs to impose certain percentage on the salary cut. However, on the same time, they only allow it on the national players of the same federation. So now, given, for example, that some part of the world where international players or foreign players are limited by a certain quota, I cannot allow myself to impose salary reduction, for example, on the national players and give a special treatment to the other players. So do you think it's still fair and proportionate to impose the same salary reduction given that a circular was issued by the national body or not? Because while I can agree with you that this may be or may be not in line with the guidelines of FIFA, but it's a fact. And therefore, how do you treat this as FIFPRO and representative of the players?
Of course, I would never balance it to the lower. I don't know how to explain it, but like it's okay. So if you have killed half of the people, then better kill the other half, because half are already dead. I don't follow the reasoning. So because you're imposing something that is not according to any law, because to unilaterally in a labor relationship, to impose unilaterally a salary cut, I don't know where that is allowed. So you're already doing that, but because you're doing it to national players, then then it's okay to do it to international players. I really cannot find the connection there. I do not think that would stand no in the FIFA DRC. I really don't think so. Maybe Stefano can give his opinion, but
before we go to Stefano, and also to add on what Daniel just say, and not to convince you to change your mind actually, but just to add on it, because I've seen some of the national federations, more than actually one. There are actually much more details. Of course, Daniel would not be able to bring all the condition and the specifications in the national approach within a question. But of course, for example, there is a minimum salary that if the salary at certain number, so that reduction doesn't apply. Of course, that the club have to start with negotiating with every single club, because as you are aware, there are many countries that doesn't have a proper established players association. So the club have to negotiate. So those regulations, most of them, I've seen them saying that the club have to prove that have really negotiated with the player and tried their best to reach an amicable agreement. And if the club does this, and the club, of course, the player, let's assume, rejected the club approach, and the club have proven financially from a documentation that they are financially suffering, and make an equal cut in terms of percentage with a minimum, like if someone less than X salary not to be touched. So there are a lot of conditions surrounding this, which make you feel that more or less not necessarily directly in line with FIFA guidelines, but it was to take the similar approach, but for the lack of players association, it's difficult to make this collective negotiation. If you will say just a minute, 1 minute or less final comment, and maybe we can also give the floor to Stefano, because I think we have almost done.
Yeah, no, okay. So yeah, sorry, because I had not understood like this whole context. So this situation is different. Still, I want to make a remark because I've seen this and I think it's also wrongly interpreted. To negotiate doesn't mean to send an offer and if the player says no, oh fine, then tick, I already complied with this, next one. That is not negotiation. Okay, so and I think this is really important because this I have seen a lot. Clubs feeling like, oh, okay, I've complied with my part. I sent an offer which was maybe 20% of the salary so that the player would receive, not 20% discount, that the player would get 20% of the salary. And the player says, what are you saying? And then the club says, okay, tick, I already negotiated. Okay, the player said no, so now I will go. And then of course this will fail with the proportionality, reasonableness, and okay, that's fine. But I think it's really important. But as you explained it now, then the situation will really have to be analyzed case by case. But it would be more or less following the FIFA guidelines in that scenario, right? So if all the requirements are complied with, then we will look specifically at that case and see whether the modification of the contract was justified, let's say, or not. But I think it will take time for all of us to see how this will be decided, because there have not been any decisions yet on this matter. The first decisions will come, will be made now in July, but in the end of July. So we will see how this evolves. But I think what is very important is that we will look at these guidelines and make this exception. It's an exception, also important to understand, for a COVID situation modification of the contract. And then for the rest, the normal regulations and the normal approach and the normal jurisprudence should still apply.
Thank you very much. We already reached the end of this roundtable. Stefano, do you have a minute if you want to conclude?
Thank you, Saleh. Yes, I love sitting in the same roundtables as with Alexandra. Like I love sitting in the same dispute resolution chamber panel with her, because we never agree with each other. And this is the case today, even if the last words she said are closer to my opinion. To make it very short, I believe that FIFA has somehow given instructions. Of course, everything must be led by good faith, reasonableness, and proportionality to adapt to the difficult situation. And clubs, provided that all those principles have been complied with, and that something must be done to tackle this very difficult situation, I believe that there is indeed some room to also unilaterally, at the end of the day, reduce the salary of players. But for sure, we will see, and I'm sure that the FIFA administration likes having Alexandra and me in the same chamber, because many times they select both of us together, and we will see. We will wait and see what will be decided, not only by us, but by all other members. Thank you, Saleh, and thank you all.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Alexandra, and also thank you, Ronan. Thank you to our attendees. Thank you very much. And now I think time to leave the stage to the last roundtable of this interesting day. Ronan, it's with you now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Saleh. Thank you to Stefano and Alexandra. You stay because you're in the next roundtable. And thank you, Ricardo. So we are now addressing the last issue, and Marcos Mota is going to be the moderator of this roundtable. The question is investing in tomorrow's football and restoring trust. So there are many things to say also about this topic. Okay, we have Gianluca. Hi, Gianluca.
Here we go.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Marcus.
Can you see me well?
Yes, perfectly.
Very good. Thank you. Can you hear me well as well? Okay.
Awesome.
There we go. Fantastic.
Well, you have the floor, Marcos. I leave you the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Ronan. It's a fantastic event so far, and we have the opportunity to try to make the closings, but I think that we can take this opportunity also to address some issues that has not been addressed before or left behind. We have a lot of topics to cover and has been covered since yesterday. And but first of all, of course, on behalf of the whole AIAF and our president, Patricia, thank you so much for your audience, for following us. More and more, this kind of forum is important because we are facing some unprecedented times in our personal lives and, of course, in our industry. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm talking from São Paulo, Rio, Brazil. I have the pleasure here to introduce you our guest speakers for this panel. First and foremost, Ms. Ornella Desiree Pelia, that I can call my dear Ornella, FIFA Head of Professional and FIFA Legal and Compliance Division. We have Alexandra Gomez. Alexandra, thank you so much. You have been introduced already in the first panel, so you're ready to warm up, so you can help us to keep the ball rolling in this final panel. And I have my colleagues, of course, José Miguel Sampaio Nora, my Portuguese colleague, member also from the labor dispute arbitration of the Portuguese Federation. More and more, the local DRC will play an important role considering the amount of potential litigations and the amount of potential issues that we have been facing lately in our everyday lives as professionals of the industry. And finally, my colleague Gianluca Cambarelli, from Italian lawyer, partner of Tonucci Partners in Italy. So our topic here today, it's pretty interesting and pretty important because we have been discussing since yesterday about the rules, about regulations, about some topics that we're gonna also discuss it here. But I think that it's quite undisputed that this sort of hiatus that the sport has created uncertainty for everyone in the sport industry, especially for those that somehow play a role, like football in the football production chain and the football economics, stakeholders, lawyers, sponsors, and everyone involved in other industries, as I said. I'm also of the opinion that the full impact of the coronavirus in football revenues will only become apparent over time. I think it's impossible for us at this stage try to understand and to predict what will happen soon. Maybe because we can even have the risk of the second spike that's already a reality in some regions. So I don't want to be the pastor of disaster, but I could say that we're still under uncertainty times and you have to be prepared about what about to come. Easy or difficult times, we have to be prepared. Yesterday, I was talking to you in one of the first negotiations that we have started during now this pandemic, a big club in Europe, top club, can say top 10 clubs in Europe. And the first question, as usual, I asked him, so what's going on? How's it going? Things are getting better now? They say, no, Marcos, things are getting worse. And we predict that next season or next year, 2021, will be even more difficulties, maybe, considering the situation that we are facing now, that we will reflect next year. So in terms of the issues, whatever expiring playing contracts, clubs liquidity, commercial agreements ending or being renegotiating or postponement, the timing of the next transfer market, transfer windows, the impact of the delay of cancellation of the season in some countries and some regions, and all these combined with countless, as I said, legal disputes make the football market even more complex. And obviously, these have a direct impact in the clubs. I think that we have this COVID situation hitting hard the three main sources of revenue in sport. So I'd like to invite our panelists to think about it. We are talking, obviously, the three pillars that base any and all football or league or stakeholder or governing body, even FIFA, which is the broadcasting, meaning the media rights deals, commercial, and that means a sponsorship, advertisement, partnership, and so on, and obviously the match day. This is the thing about the football pandemic. There is no solution at all that fits everybody. So it's time, therefore, and invite you all for the spirit of compromise. We all have here an important role in the industry, but we have to all agree that it is time for a wake-up call, okay? That's my invitation for you to think about it, but it is indeed time for a wake-up call in our industry. So coming into the topics that we'd like to discuss with you here, and I think the title is very interesting, like investing in football tomorrow, or in tomorrow's football. Are we ready to plug in these new possibilities or new trends in football? It's clear for me that we went through three phases. The first phase was like, it was like the panic phase when we have the outbreak. So the second was the learning phase. We are trying always to learn. And now I think we are in the third phase, respective of what is come next, which is the adaptation phase. We have to adapt about this new market. So I'd like to bring to you here today some issues to be discussed, meaning the general impact in terms of revenue streams, players' wages and remuneration, that I think that we have touched this a little bit in the previous panel. The balance or the unbalanced market. Are you ready to face this unbalanced market and why I think there's going to be a really unbalanced market in the near future? Transfers, of course, the transfer market's directly impacted over the situation. Youth squads, very important since clubs are running low money, so they have to focus on the youth squads. The measures taken by FIFA, UEFA, and obviously by FIFPRO. And finally, which sort of finance and refinance tools we can find in the market as a possible remedies and tools to help this the industry at the moment. So I'll turn my first question maybe to Gianluca. Gianluca, in terms of the general impact in the revenues in football, what was your first perception, your current perception, and your future perception about the impact on the revenues, incomes, and commercial streams in football?
Well, thank you, Marcos, and good evening, good afternoon to everybody. You have touched many interesting points, especially in terms of the effect of the COVID on the balance sheet of the clubs. And we talk, obviously, when we talk about revenue streams, we have to consider the negative impact that this COVID situation, this pandemic, negatively affected the balance sheet of the clubs. As of today, we are sure that we had a very, very strong economic and financial impact on the balance sheet of the clubs. Unfortunately, it is something that is still difficult to be quantified, because we don't know when this situation will stop and the clubs will come to make ordinary business like it was in the past. But it's a matter of fact that this pandemic face up some specific aspects, some critical aspects of the clubs and their financial, especially for those clubs and those championships that base their balance sheet and their revenues on the capital gain of transfer market. The first impact that we had in general speaking, obviously, is the fact that we have no spectators at the stadium, and we don't know when we will have spectators back to the stadium. In Italy, for instance, we have started the end of the season by 20 of June, and we expect to conclude it by the end of July. For now, stadiums are still closed. Now that we are discussing, our authorities are discussing about the possibility to open the stadium even for a small number of people from the 15th of July. So let's try to start to have some new attendance at the stadium. I read that also UEFA is evaluating about the possibility to have the final phase of the UEFA Champions League with spectators, and hopefully if the pandemic will stop, it will be a good solution to come back to our ordinary life. So this was one of the bigger problems that clubs had to face up in this period, but not only this, because also broadcaster rights have started to discuss with clubs about the payment of the installments of the TV rights for the end of the season. Obviously, TV broadcaster rights are scared about the fact that even if the championship and the leagues were restarted, they can be stopped again, and so you know how much important is this item and this aspect of the revenues deriving from broadcasting rights in the balance sheet of the clubs, which are likely 70–80% of the revenues generated by the club are characterized by this element. And so not having the broadcasters paid timely, their revenues would create also a very big financial problem, a financial issue on the clubs. And we have also to consider the sponsorship agreement. Many sponsorship agreements have clauses that provide for the early termination of the contract if the performance of the club are not in line with the expectations and with the agreements that they have reached with the sponsors. For instance, several sponsors agreements provides for the early termination if there is an imbalance of the activities that have to be done by the club. And you know that not having football matches played or not having attendance at the stadium is creating some problems to clubs, and which are now negotiating with the sponsors new different terms, which are obviously and unlikely lower than the one they had in the past. And also the transfer market will be obviously negatively affected by this pandemic. I've seen, for example, the KPMG case study that it quantified in at least 20 or in a range of 20 and 30% the reduction of the value of the football players and consequently of the roster and of the clubs. From my experience in the last months, the big clubs that were traded for M&A transactions after the COVID reduced their value from 20 to 30%. And obviously, this situation will cause the necessity for the shareholders to reconsider their plan of investment into the clubs. Budgets that were approved at the beginning of this season are completely changed, and obviously also to be allowed to obtain the UEFA license for the next sporting season or the authorization to play the national championship has to be considered also to be, let's say, amended or reconsidered of how these rules were up to until last year. For example, the financial fair play regulations, we know that the emergency working group is working on this aspect, and we have to try to some rules able to mitigate the negative impact that the COVID has on the books of the clubs. These are just general consideration about how the revenue streams have been impacted by the COVID. And for sure, I think that the governmental body of FA, national, international, also federations have to face up with this. Otherwise, from the next season, I think that we will have many clubs that were not allowed to play national and international competitions. You are on mute, Marcus.
Now it's good, huh? Okay, you can hear me now. Sorry about that. There's still some technical issues here. I think that you have touched very interesting points indeed, and you know, we pre-covered several aspects that we are facing at the moment, and I think that this leads to a very interesting topic and subject, which is the kind of unbalanced market. We see now some leagues, they are returning playing, others not. Then we can discuss it here, not only the competitive balance. For example, you see Leipzig is playing for the last almost 45 days in the German Bundesliga, while PSG, that they will be hitting in the UEFA quarters final, we still have them only playing. Yesterday I spoke with Thiago Silva, he's only practicing right now. So this uncertainty also will cause a lot of imbalance in terms of revenue streams, commercial streams. This is also has a big impact. We all know that the main force of any sports marketing that plays an important role in terms of commercial revenues of the clubs that drives this sports markets and the financial oxygenation of football is the repetition, right? I mean, live events. When you have the competition, you hardly can beat the live event, the repetition, the Nike swoosh playing every day in the Liverpool or New York Yankees shirts. This is the beauty of the marketing. So we have some places that we already have these live events in place. Others are still suspended or postponed. So having said that, I would like to invite José. Boa tarde. Do you think that this kind of uncertainty and this discrepancy in terms of the reality of different markets worldwide can lead to an even more imbalanced market in terms of competition and also financially speaking?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Patricia and Ronan, for the invitation. Thanks for our colleagues in this brilliant panel with a lot of competent things. I think it's very good to us to have two important women, very competent and experienced in this market, and I would like to appreciate first. Regarding that, I've been hearing Gianluca and you, Marcus. Of course, we are all worried about. Joking, I also said that we are working in the last 10 years regarding the challenge of the calendar regarding the Qatar Mundial of national teams, and we have this COVID that catches us everything, and us in particular as persons who work in football regarding that. First of all, I think, like Gianluca said, and you, Marcus, specifically, we don't know what are going to happen to our deals and to our market. Like I said, we only see the top of the iceberg, and we don't see all the rest of the problem. We are worried, and we are catching some elements that we can't predict, and the predictions are not so good. For example, in Portugal, where I live and where I work, of course, we are all Europeans, but because you are in the UA, but in Portugal, the broadcasting all the clubs, it's a very important revenue, because as you know, the TV rights are not centralized, and the revenues of the TV in the first league are almost 75% of the total of the revenues of the first league. And with the stopping and the suspension of the championship, the TVs started to quit to pay until the restarting that joyfully started almost a month. I think, like Marcos said, of course, Portugal and specifically is like Brazil, is a championship to form players and to sell them to the rest of the world. And without this, I think that the market will be unbalanced in the future, because we cannot sell our players, because it will happen a decrease of transfer of Portuguese players in and out. I think it's publicly, a lot of chairmen said it to us on the news, and it's frequent to say. And I think they are more than the problems that they have today. They are expecting more problems in the future that they cannot specify in particular. Of course, we are all worried about, and I think that in particular case of Portugal would change the strategy of some clubs, that we are combining the formation and the youth league, the investment in youth leagues, and they are combined with some transfers. But now I think in case of Portugal, we are starting backing in the first item, and they are backing to the youth in the formation. The Portuguese FA, the president said 1 month ago that we don't have the future guaranteed in football. And that's, the expression is very clear, very synthetic, and I think it's very that shows us what the future is we can expect. I think FIFA, with all the stakeholders, when FIFPRO is included, they have changed a lot of COVID principles that can guide us to the future. But I think it's not everything. And I think in Portugal, we can expect now, and I think it's going to be transversal to all Europe. We have to expect less money in football, in market, specifically with the sponsors and all the commercial things, like Marcos said, is one of the pillars. I want to say that without people in the stadiums, we hope that in the near future, the people is going to return to the stadiums. But now nobody knows where it's going to happen. We are standing with one of the pillar, like Marcos defined it, with the broadcasting. And I think as long as we have TV broadcasting with our games, and the restarting of the Portuguese league is great news for everybody, but we are all concerned about what's going to happen in the future. And I think that it will be an unbalanced market in the future. And because all the states and the taxes will increase, also because of the aiding that the government is giving to combat COVID. But I think we are all worried. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Jose. We're going to, of course, open the floor for a debate and questions, but I'd like now to turn the floor to Ornella. Ornella, the first time that I stepped in FIFA was in '99 in a debate and a discussion of a case with Gianpaolo Montenegro, who is the head of the player status. Omar was his trainee, and Zen Hoofenen was the general secretary. And I remember that the regulation don't start and transfer players, there were like 12 pages only. Nowadays, you see like loads of regulations, books, but I would say that have been doing a fantastic job. It's not easy to tackle it, to address, like a global issue like we are facing now. I think your I call it the new FIFA. There is the new market, the new FIFA. The new FIFA is doing pretty well. You know that I'm a little bit critical in terms of over-regulating the market. I think I like the free market, you know, to just let the market flow and adapt itself. But in any case, it's a big challenge to FIFA as a governing body. So I'd like to ask you, how is FIFA is dealing with this financial crisis in terms of regulations we know already, but internally, give us some insights and some hints on how FIFA is facing this financial crisis caused by COVID in order to try to avoid the collapse of the entire system. And I know that there are more to come in terms of the FIFA Relief Fund, discussions on terms of fiscal regulations. And I think this is all very important in the present, in the moment, and in the near future.
Yeah. Bom dia, boa tarde, Marco. Obrigada. Hello, everyone. So thank you, of course, for the invitation to Patricia and Ronan. Yeah, as you said, at FIFA, we are working hard, try to make the best out of it and try to help the football community, the football world, to manage the situation. You mentioned the FIFA fund, which was actually approved last week by the FIFA Council, where actually 1.5 billion were put at disposal of the football community through grants and loans, basically to the football association, which in turn will be able to pass these funds to clubs, players, and so on. Besides that, as you also mentioned, we are working on these fiscal regulation items, which has been on the agenda of the task force transfer system already for a while. It was included on the agenda in January 2018, so a long time ago, before this crisis, and I believe that now it's really time to address it in a more urgent way, because so far we have had several discussions. Alexandra knows it because FIFPRO has been quite a lot active on the discussion. I think you've seen also the statements from our president, Gianni Infantino. He has many times stated that we need to focus on some financial regulations. I know that, Marco, you don't like regulate too much the market, but we believe that at a certain point we have to, because the situation is critical, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19. And as you also mentioned, it's a wake-up call for the industry. So we believe that there is no magic formula to deal with this current crisis. It is a global financial crisis, and football, of course, is one of the components, and of course is impacted. There is no magic formula, and the only way to address the situation, the only crisis management response to this financial distress caused by COVID could just be, reducing the operating costs of football clubs. What does it mean? Transfer fees, player salaries. I know that Alexandra will not be happy for this statement, but of course it's a result, like in any other industry. So clubs have to be prudent in planning the next years. As you also mentioned before, the worst maybe is yet to come, because we have seen a certain financial impact for this season, but the impact on next season will be huge. If you think about the fact that we are entering a phase of recession at worldwide level, this also means that from a financial point of view, there will be an impact because sponsors will not be able to keep their sponsoring contracts. So in the end, it's a chain, and everybody will be affected. So we have already analyzed certain measures. Of course, all the measures have to be negotiated with all the stakeholders, the clubs, the leagues, the players, confederation, member association. This means that FIFA will not impose anything on in the market, but there will be a negotiation as it has been so far. But maybe we will bring to the table some financial measures. I don't want to say too much at the moment, but some financial measures trying to deal with the situation. There is something I want to highlight, and is the fact that if you look at the wages revenue ratio, of course, you know that the UEFA financial control, financial fair play control system foresees a maximum of 70% in this ratio. I mean, the wages of a squad cannot be higher than 70% of the total revenue of a club. And the problem we are gonna experience this year and next year, next season, are that this ratio may increase dramatically because of the drop in revenues. So it's really important that clubs keep an eye on that, of course, but especially it's important that in the coming transfer market, they try to be prudent in spending money. There is also something else regarding this ratio, wages, revenues. If you look not at the top 5 leagues, but the other smaller leagues, in some cases, this ratio is super high, and wages represent more than 95% of the total revenues of a football club. So it's something that it's something that we knew before COVID. And maybe it's time, you know, to take a step back, to think how we can address the situation to make football more sustainable. And I think whenever there is a crisis, it's always an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to reinvent the industry where we work in. And I'm very positive that in the end, we will be able to manage the situation in a good way, in coordination with all the stakeholders, as it has been so far. And maybe in the end, we will thank COVID for having helped the process. Unfortunately, there have been so many bad things meanwhile, but in the end, I hope that we can make the best out of this situation.
Thank you, Ornella. Thank you so much. Very, very important issues here addressed by Ornella, and what's next regarding FIFA. Alexandra, you know, I was watching the previous panel, and you have addressed also some very interested and important topics. And you know that sometimes I had opportunity before to join some task force in FIFA with FIFPRO, with Brendan, and we had discussions also here doing these webinars throughout the last 100 days. And the topics are always the same. We touched it here, the transfer market, the commercial revenues, match day, live events. So all of these are connected. Also, our firm had the opportunity to discuss with big clubs collectively in terms of renegotiating players' contracts, also in Portugal with big clubs, in Brazil, collectively, individually. So my question is FIFPRO, I know pretty well FIFPRO's position, is FIFPRO ready to become a little bit more flexible in terms, do the players understand the role in all this process, or maybe they are still thinking that this is a isolated issue with a certain club or a certain club? Could you give us a more general perspective about the FIFPRO approach in the situation that we have been discussing here? And also, what's the perception of the players? Are really they are ready to understand what's the situation? Are they ready to compromise? Good afternoon, Alexandra.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Marco. I really don't think, and you will laugh about it, but I really don't think that FIFPRO is not flexible. If a stakeholder has shown flexibility, that has been FIFPRO. There's no other stakeholder that has been impacted by the transfer market as the players have in all these years. We even retracted from the claim that we lodged in the European Commission, because we are flexible and because we said, of course, fine, if now FIFA and other stakeholders, if you're willing to negotiate with us, of course, we are also willing to negotiate with you. So I really don't think that we are not flexible, definitely. I sometimes think that we are too flexible, to be honest. And that's why I'm not in the politics. But to be honest, and I know that many of you might already target me like, oh, the union person, and then just block what I'm saying. But I'm in contact with a lot of players, and I have not spoken with any player, no player, that has told me, no way, I'm not going to get a salary cut. No way. What are you talking about? No player. They all say, of course, I understand the situation, but sometimes there are issues. If you have not been paid for the last 6 months, then I think it's normal that as a player you say, okay, fine, pay my overdue, and we negotiate a salary reduction. But like, so and I think it's only rational what players expect. And of course there will be a case of a player that goes nuts, probably. I have not spoken with any of those, just like blocking and saying like, I'm not negotiating with you. But I think if that situation arises, it will probably be because of the relationship with the club and because of how the club has behaved. What we have experienced, and a lot, for example, in women football, because with the males, normally they're a little bit better taken care of, is that they were just not told anything. It was like, oh, okay, no, we're not, sometimes we suspend everything. Sometimes we're not starting the tournament, because this happened a lot for male football in some divisions as well. But for women football, there are some cases where the tournament was about to start, so they didn't start. And the players didn't even get an email, a WhatsApp. I'm not saying even a call, just to inform. And if the information would be really bad and would be like, listen, we cannot pay to you, at least you're informing. So I know I sometimes may sound radical, but we see things that are just crazy. And everything seems to be justified because it's football, which I really don't understand what it means. So also when we say like, oh, okay, yeah, true, and I fully understand that the revenues of clubs have lowered dramatically, but I also fully understand, and I think that everyone should understand, that a club would not have planned for this, but they should have a buffer, like any company. It's not possible what we saw in some cases where they just the day after the closure, when I say closure, the declaration of the pandemic, then they were already like, hop, tournament terminated, and the players are free, so clubs do not have to pay any salaries. Which is, for example, what happened in Panama. And then this was negotiated, there was a huge reaction. Okay, then in the end, it was pretty bad situation, but it was not that drastic in the end, because we intervened and the union did a great job, and we also had the help from professional football, from Ornella. We spoke with her about that. We have been speaking with her and her team regarding different countries. But so I think that what we can learn from this is that parties have to be responsible. They need to administrate themselves in a normal way. So there should be a buffer, that for sure. It's not possible that all of a sudden, because after 1 week of closure, then there's no funds anymore in the club. And as I said also in the previous panel, there needs to be transparency. So are you only lowering the salaries of the players, or the directors and the board is also maybe getting a cut or not? or other costs of the club. So because it's very easy to just, you know, target the players, and also how to do that, you know, in a rational way, looking at what are minimum salaries that the players are still able to leave. So, but I think that in that conditions, like, all players have shown, yeah, a lot of sympathy, and they have been willing to negotiate quite tough deals. We have been going through the situation in different countries, and in many, even with the consent of players, sometimes the consent of the players is also very relative, right? Because it's like clubs telling them, like, okay, you either accept a 30% of your salary, or so a 70% cut, or we're not going to pay anything. So, and if you're struggling, it's difficult for the player to say, oh no, I'm not going to take that. So there are also a lot of situations like this. There are also other situations where the players understood and they took a more rational cut. And there are also situations that I also think that show good faith, where the clubs say, like, okay, I cannot pay you now what we have agreed in the contract, because here I show you as well, right? So transparency. But what I can tell you is, and we agreed already, that the moment they reach this amount, that I recover this amount of money, and this is drafted in different ways. Sometimes they put a date, which I think is a little bit more risky because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but sometimes they really talk about objectives. Then you're going to get this money that I have deducted back, or at least a part of that. So that shows also, like, goodwill. Like, if I'm going to be in a good financial position afterwards, why wouldn't I share that with you if I have already taken that part of your salary?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. We have seen here negotiations in which the players and the clubs negotiate salary reductions, deferrals, and even cuts on the board's wages. And now they are in the market prospecting transfers. I mean, it's going to be a pretty different. So what Gianluca said is pretty interesting. This kind of balance, to balance the books. You see now that the deal between Juventus and Barcelona regarding Arthur, I think this will be the trend of the market, sell-ons, trades. You know, it's going to be a very innovative and creative market. But I think that we have to be very, very aware about this malpractice that might be in place in the market at the moment. We have been facing a very serious situation. And I heard that some clubs are, okay, let's go back to the pitch, let's resume our tournaments, and then we start our transfer market, right? But in which conditions? So the last floor that I'd like to give to you, each of you, it's a more general point out that I think that clubs has been historically heavily indebted and financially chaotic. Of course, financial fair play, the license in Europe has, you know, faced the situation pretty well and has managed the situation pretty well. But in places like Africa, South America, Central America, and some clubs in Asia are still facing this sort of problematic, the lack of access to the financial market, to the credit. You know, in this moment, when you have the financial crisis, we know the cash flow is the king. So we are all facing the same problem, but different solutions might be in place. So my question is, which kind of financial tool in terms of possible finance and refinance in all areas of the industry in terms of clubs and players can be discussed? I have been, again, you know that very well, trying to reopen the discussion about the third-party ownership, like a transitional TPO, 100% controlled in terms of like transparency. 10% of TPO goes as solidarity mechanism, payments done through national association, TPO standard contracts, no TPO for minors, pre-registration of potential investors, limitation of percentage on each player. I mean, we are trying to tackle the situation in each region. We here have one situation. In Europe, UEFA is doing pretty well. They are flexibilizing their own financial fair play. FIFPRO is doing the same, talking to the players. FIFA is also making more flexible, for example, the registration periods. So in your view, I'll start, Gianluca, what would be the possible solutions in terms to save and to avoid a collapse of the system in terms of in financial terms, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Marcos. I would like also to connect to what Ornella said before in respect of the financial fair play regulations and how this pandemic situation will impact on this, because as far as my experience for football clubs, obviously the books, the financials of the clubs are stressed, and I would be really happy if they were available to create a buffer, as Alexandra said, but unfortunately this is only an idea. As a matter of fact, it's really impossible for a club that needs to compete in order to achieve to the revenues deriving from the UEFA Champions League, for example, to have a buffer, because they used to spend also the monies that they have to receive on the next season. And I connect to your question, how clubs is going to get financed. Well, the factorization of the players' rights, for example, are one of the aspects. So banks used to factorize the installments that are negotiated with the
receivables, right? The receivables.
Yeah, the receivables deriving from a transfer of players, rather than also the broadcasting rights of the TV from the broadcasters. So clubs used to monetize by the factoring with banks the revenues of the following season, and so you can imagine how tremendous impact has had the pandemic on the balance sheet if you are not able to consider the receivables of the following season because of the pandemic. And there was also to say that, in my view, the financial fair play rules, in respect obviously of Europe, I'm talking now, has to be considered in order to create a buffer or to create a system which allow the clubs to make a long-term investment plan. Because what's happened today? Today, clubs used to approve budgets with certain assumptions that change dramatically and terrifically if they are or not in a European competition, for example. And so clubs, if 1 year for a specific circumstance fail to get to the European revenues of the UEFA Champions League, for example, they have to reconsider completely their investment plan, which is really difficult and really impossible to change it every year. So I think that also FIFA should and UEFA have to consider how to help clubs in order to get them to be able to create a long investment plan. Otherwise, a club that starts an investment plan in creating value with the transfer of players and 1 year for some unexpected reason fail to achieve to the Champions League of the following season, have to stop this project because have to sell players in order to respect the financial fair play regulation parameters. And this is something I think that should be addressed by the competent football bodies.
Jose, your thoughts, please?
Regarding that, I was carefully hearing everyone, and specifically Alexandra talked about a thing. I think it's specifically FIFA and the stakeholders that decided that regarding the cuts in the payments of the salaries of the players, that must be a deal that must be proportionate, reasonable, and everything. And I think some of the clubs act in bad faith, ill faith, saying that that was an obligation. They must reduce. That's not happening. And I think in Portugal, in some few cases, but in some cases that work a bit worse. But I think all the lawyers, like for example me, some of them was advising about it, and we can cut some of that bad practicals. Regarding what Gianluca said about it, I've spoken about it in my first intervention, that of course is very bad. All the persons regarding the Big Five championships and the richest clubs in the world are redesigning that investment plan and everything with the COVID things. Like I said, also that we don't know the extension of the problem. We just know a little part. And like I said, also all the lawyers now and all the persons working football, you are more predictors than law advisors, because we don't know what is going to happen. I think FIFA is trying to reduce that things and that surprises, but I think only carefully plan can reduce the effects of the COVID. Specifically in Portugal, I think we have to reduce our costs, and we're trying to maximize our revenues. That's a 5 million solution, but I think it will be difficult. But in Portugal specifically, we have some cases of clubs that are trying to impose the reduction to the players with RT, the figure in Spain, and in Portuguese with layoff. But at the same time, they approve in the General Assembly revenues. And I think that in that case, it's flagrant that the players are not good. And I think that the unions, in that case, has a full importation to protect the players as the leak in the weak part of this deal.
Thank you, Jose. Ornella, is FIFA ready to watch, learn, and adapt its regulations in terms of these new trends in football?
Well, it's a good question. We should ask the task force first. So I can tell you after the next meeting that will be that is scheduled in mid-September. I know that you would like me to say that we are open to reintroduce TPO in a regulated way, but unfortunately I cannot say that.
We hope so.
So I agree with Gianluca that financial transaction like factoring will be key in the aftermath of COVID. It's a very old financial measure, but I think will be really key. And also I believe that clubs, especially clubs of course, have to rethink and try to find new ways to make money, to increase their revenues, because I think there are some unexploited, there is a certain unexploited potential. So we see the top clubs, they exploit very well all their potential, but what about all the others? So I think it's a way also now to rethink and be creative, because there is no other way. You have to reduce your operating costs and you have to find new ways to generate revenues.
Yeah, this is the beauty of the digital transformation that can help us a lot at this moment. Huh?
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Ornella. Alexandra, so is FIFPRO also ready to understand these new trends, considering that some of them or most of them involve the participation directly or indirectly of the players?
If you mean by the new trends, the TPO?
Also, players transfers and so on. Is FIFPRO ready to again?
Actually, FIFPRO's position has always been that the transfer system as it is and as it has been is wrong, and is that it does not achieve the objectives under which it was justified before the European Commission. So definitely we would love to see change. We would love to see change. If there's, I'm going to say something really blunt, and I know it may sound superficial, but if there's something that we have in football, is money. Think of other industry that has as much money as football industry. The problem in football is that it's terribly administrated and that it's not well distributed.
100% agreed.
So it's about finding a way, but it's not that we don't have money.
Yeah, beautiful. This is the beauty of the market. You can attract money even during the crisis. I mean, because
sorry, and one tiny bit. I really call for the responsibility of not only the clubs, because I've been mentioning clubs a lot, but federations. Federations need to control clubs, and they need to look after them and to see that everything is going okay, and also the players, of course. Confederations, they also have a role, and FIFA also has a role. And FIFA has been taking a lot of steps, which we really appreciate. For example, now the FIFA Fund for Players, that's a great thing that has happened, that we have been working for a long time. And it's amazing that it has happened. But for example, this has, I don't want to say too much about it, but it has shown, because actually the deadline was just yesterday, so we haven't processed all the information. But what it has shown is that the confederation with the most money, which obviously is UEFA, has the most debts in, at least in this, the claims lodged by the players, which may be for a variety of reasons, but which is really worrying. It's really worrying that within UEFA Confederation, with the money that it involves, there are so many clubs going bankrupt and leaving players without their payment. Because, sorry, I didn't, maybe some people were not aware, but this FIFA Fund for Players is about compensating or paying the due salaries that their clubs should have paid, but then they went bankrupt, and then there was no way for the players to collect that money. But just wanted to mention that briefly, sorry.
No problem. I totally agree. I think the role of the governing bodies is to create the proper environment for the shift, because you have two options here in our industry at the moment. Or we press the atomic button, or we press the restart button. So the role of the governing body is exactly to create, and none of us here directly involved in the industry, because we are all players here, is to create this environment for this necessary shift. We have a new guest here with us, AIAF President Patricia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with this fantastic panel. It was a great time with all of us. And now I give the floor to our President. Patricia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcos. It was a fascinating roundtable. Thanks to you all. I think that, as Oneza said, COVID-19 is a terrible time, but also it forced all the stakeholders together around the table. It forced family together around the table, and this football is a big family. And as Marcos said, football is a competition, but it's also entertainment. And we've seen that we have to look at it as a competition, but also entertainment with the public, with a TV, a live event. Then we've seen also through your roundtable and the previous roundtable that there are three. Football organization is a puzzle composed by regulation, composed by contracts, so negotiation, collective bargaining, and by business also. So increase incomes and decrease outcomes, this is the challenge. I think that through this webinar we've seen, and for sure we have a new FIFA, and this is very important. The way FIFA faced the situation with what I like to call a social dialogue, and they've done fantastic, amazing job, because I was sure that Onela and the others, they worked a lot, and we have a new FIFA, but we have also a new market.
Yeah.
And it is the topic we will address in our next Congress, AIAF in Rio. It is postponed, but thanks to Marcos, we believe in AIAF that focus on this new market. This is also the role of AIAF to look at it. We have new challenge, and it's fantastic because it's new challenge for all stakeholders. It's new challenge for players, new challenge for governing bodies, new challenge for agents, and new challenge for lawyers, football lawyers. We are now, you remember, Marcos, the first time we met, it was in 1999, so 20 years ago, yes. at FIFA.
Yeah.
And now everything changed. So it's a fantastic opportunity for all of us. So thank you all for your involvement and fantastic participation. Thank you for, and I think that also I would like, Alexandra said something interesting, that maybe women football can show the way. So have a look on women football. It's very interesting, and maybe it's a new market too, but the new market with different view. And I liked very much what you said, Alexandra. So tomorrow we will have the Spanish session, and I'm sure it will be fascinating. And if you are lucky to understand Spanish, come and join, because it will not be, even if we have some same guest speaker, but I'm sure that the Latin America and Central America point of view will also bring very new ideas and new debate. Thank you all. Good evening. Bye-bye, Marcos. Bye-bye, Ornella, Gianluca, Ronan, Jose, Alexandra.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all for participating.